The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor and Stress 2 Logic, your host. And today we are visited by Fred Nickl from Williams Nickl, which is a law firm that helps people restore their Second Amendment rights, as well as, and I'm going to ask you about this, as well as other types of licensure with the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation, or IDPFR. Fred, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. Good to be here.
Awesome. I found Fred through a couple of people. I have a student, and he was actually on the show talking about the process last summer, who used Fred. And I also had a fellow attorney in one of my recent classes who said, if I had to send anyone for this type of reinstatement, this is the guy I would send. So 2 people is a pattern, 2 references is a pattern, so that tells me he's good. And I would love to not refer business to him, meaning nobody has problems. But if somebody does have a problem, I'm happy to refer business. Fred, can you tell everyone, what is your origin story? How did you get involved in wanting to become an attorney, practicing law, and specifically focusing on licensing?
Well, I will tell you that I grew up on the north side of Chicago, so I'm a north sider by birth and origin, and pretty strong Chicago connection. Grew up in a liberal family, Catholic grade school, seminary high school, UIC for college. I basically took the red line every single day for maybe 12 years straight, and then went into DePaul Law, so I was on the red line again. But after that, my experiences have really broadened my outlook on things. I will still call myself a flaming liberal, but it will confuse you based on some of my positions, and those positions really are, if you have a right that other people also have, and someone is stopping you from exercising that right, I love to help you. Whether that is a right to practice as a physician or a nurse or a real estate broker because a state agency says you shouldn't do that, or the right to possess, purchase, and sell firearms, that is a right I would love to help you with. It doesn't always... some of my colleagues who might still be on the other side, meaning they don't do defense work, they do prosecutions or things like that, they don't typically understand that, which is odd. A lot of people don't understand that. Generally, prosecutors don't want guns in folks' hands. Generally, prosecutors run real conservative in their thinking, so that's kind of a confusing thing. And then a defense person will generally sometimes be liberal, but then want to help you exercise those rights. So I'm doing exactly what I love to do. I started as a state's attorney in Lee County, which was odd. The only reason I got the job there was I pointed to the pickup truck I drove out the window. I was talking to the state's attorney, Dan Fish, who said, we get folks coming from Chicago all the time because you can start doing trials right away out here, but you only last a year. How do we know you're in it for the long run? I said, well, I own a shotgun, and that's my pickup truck. And I was hired. Nice. And then I left within a year because it turns out I can't be that knight in shining armor. Everything isn't black and white to me. There are a lot of shades of gray. So I ended up being a public defender, which is the exact opposite, and thought I was going to be a lifelong public defender in McHenry County. That did not last more than 4 or 5 years. At a certain point, I was representing a grandfather, a father, and a son or a grandson, so 3 generations all at once. And I thought these were my people, but they're really not. No one cares. And I went into a mid-sized defense litigation firm downtown Chicago. And when I saw an opportunity to join my former partner in handling licensure work, specifically professional licensure and firearm licensure, I jumped at it, and that was a long time ago, and we haven't looked back.
That is fantastic. I greatly appreciate all the work you did, all the experience that you did, and you said something that I'm going to focus in on just for a moment. You said, I'm a flaming liberal.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, are you, well, I have several questions. How did you get involved? Did you have firearms growing up, or how did you get involved in the Second Amendment field or world?
I didn't know anyone growing up that had firearms. I like to say, like, now I'm a lawyer, I live in the suburbs, you'd think I'd played golf. No, I never played golf. I didn't know anyone who played golf growing up. And the one or two guys that did end up playing golf, they were right-handed, and they couldn't share their clubs with me as a left-handed guy. So for that same type of reason, I wasn't exposed to firearms until living on my own, living in a maybe not a great neighborhood, and we're on the first floor. And I asked some of my friends who were in law enforcement and said, "What do I do here?" And they said, "A shotgun." Number one, the sound of, and forgive me if I get any of the technical terms. Although I enjoy firearms, I'm not an expert at these, but the kind of the racking of that shotgun sound is going to scare most people off. And if you did have to fire it, you're not going to, you're not shooting a 45 through all the apartment walls that are just plaster, right? You're not going to kill anyone 3 rooms down. And that's kind of how I got exposed to that. And then in law school, one of the deans suggested I apply for a scholarship from, and I'm blanking on the full name of it, but it's a national Second Amendment lobbying group. They sponsored 3 different levels of scholarships, like 5,000, 1,000, and then maybe a tote bag for writing firearm legislation. And so I looked at the Illinois legislation back then, and I proposed a amendment to it that would make it more in line with civil rights thinking. And I wrote it in the way that the legislatures do it, with strikeouts and additions, and included a background as to why I think this legislation should be sponsored and approved. And that ended up winning the prize that year, which was $5,000. And that always kind of got me thinking about it. And then my first job in Lee County, out in Dixon, Illinois, there were a lot of gun owners out there, a lot of hunting, sports shooting, folks in the office shot, a lot of farmers out there. That kind of got my interest in that. Ended up purchasing my first Glock, always using a safe and trigger locks and things like that. And so that's where it came from, really.
So let me get this straight. You're a lefty and you're a flaming liberal? There's a joke in there somewhere. Okay, I'm teasing you. It's just some humor.
I know.
So, and thank you for having a sense of humor. Have you?
Of course.
So, being a liberal and being a gun owner, a lot of people in the conservative world are like, "Oh my God, that's cognitive dissonance. I cannot believe that." You know something? I went to the shooting range with one of Al Gore's close friends. So I was exposed to this a long time ago. Have you heard of, or are you a member of the Liberal Gun Owners Organization?
No, I have not heard of that.
Okay. Offline, I will send you the information. It's like $10 for the year. And let me tell you the difference between conservative gun groups and the liberal gun group. Conservative gun groups are filled with what I will call nonsense. And I'm a member of them because there's good information there too. There's a lot of memes, there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of people who you don't really understand. They're kidding, or they're talking about rhetoric or politics or things that are outside of the Second Amendment. Whereas in the liberal gun club, holy cow, it's only about firearms. It's not about politics. It's about, hey, I'm thinking about picking up an XYZ. What do you think of it? Or here's some training stuff that you can do at the range. I absolutely love the group because it is hyper-focused on the issues that are interesting to me, at least. So I'll send that to you offline afterwards.
Sure, thank you.
My pleasure. And it's, have you heard of the name David Yamani?
No.
Okay, so he is a professor out of Wake Forest with a W in the Carolinas, and he does a class, and I just took the online version. The class is something like the 10 essential observations of gun owners, and he is a liberal also, but he's a gun owner and a sociologist, and he's written a book on it. I'll send you all the information. It's
Great.
Fabulously brilliant and very balanced. So he might be someone who you can draw from.
Awesome.
So some people have, and I'm talking about mostly men, testosterone filled teens and 20s. You know, when you're in junior high, when you're in high school, someone challenges you to a fight, you fight. But later on in life, these people settle down, they get married, they have a family, they stop going to bars. And a lot of times in people's youth, they will apply for a FOID card either later in life or then and get denied. How can someone reinstate their firearm rights if they've been denied a FOID card?
There are two main types of appeals. So anytime you get denied a license or your license is revoked, if you had it and then lost it, you always have a right to an appeal. Well, I'm going to strike that. You have 99.99% of the time you have a right to an appeal. There are two main types in Illinois. There's one called an informal appeal, which simply means we don't go to court. And then there's the formal appeal, where we do have to go to court. And we don't get a choice. That choice is made for us depending on whatever you did as that testosterone-fueled teen or young adult. Generally, standard felonies, orders of protection, things like that are going to be an informal appeal. We write this out. I call it a paper appeal, but no one uses paper anymore. It's going to be a PDF that goes to the state police, and then it'll be triaged. It'll either be handled by the state police, or it'll be forwarded to Lauren Raymond, who's the executive director for the FOID Card Review Board. Or if you have a domestic conviction, or actually any domestic violence related conviction, which is the federal law, it's a little bit different than Illinois, or you've got a forcible felony, and the forcible felony means a lot of things. It means burglary, which is surprising because burglary can be, you see a garage, you want to steal a bike out of a garage, so you break the window, open the door, take the bike, and no one ever sees you. That's a forcible felony. And then specific firearm charges and higher level drug charges. Those we have to go into court. And either way, there's a defined process. And I can tell you that whether you're hiring someone like me or you're hiring someone else, or maybe if you're doing it yourself, the rates of success are way higher than they ever have been.
Interesting.
I think just from pummeling, at least in Cook County, which used to be very, very anti-gun, if you are filing one of these and you're in Chancery Division of Cook County, all of those judges are probably sick of seeing us, but it's been pounded into them that, hey, there's a right there. And if you can establish that you're not that person you used to be, you'll get that right restored. Similarly, the Illinois State Police, they're very good about that. The FOID Card Review Board is another matter. But yeah, there is definitely a path. It is a confusing path sometimes. I hear from a lot of people that say, hey, I waited 20 years after my drug case. I should get my FOID back automatically. Well, no, you didn't have to wait the 20 years. That only applies to forcibles. And it's not automatic. We're going to have to reapply, get a new denial, and then within a certain amount of time, file your appeal. It's much better than it's ever been. I can say that.
That's terrific. And I want to step on my little soapbox here and tell everyone that as I get older, I realize I don't know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. And I will rely on experts like Fred here for these types of things. That's also why I hire a CPA to do my taxes. I don't know how to do I mean, can I fill out a form? Sure, but I don't know what the tax laws are. So I'm a big believer in engaging experts if you need to. So what are some challenges that would come up with an appeal or a reinstatement of firearm rights?
So I get calls all the time. The classic call will be a black man from the west side or south side of Chicago who has a 1990s related drug charge. Now, you can get into the whole conservative versus liberal argument as to why there were a million drug charges on black men in the 90s. Doesn't really happen anymore. But these guys are truck drivers, or they're city employees, or they're entrepreneurs, or they're in real estate. They haven't been arrested since the 90s. They've got grandkids. Their friends all go sport shooting or, et cetera. And they call and they're always curious. And they say, you know what, Ken, is this something I can even think about? And I go, absolutely. Or I might talk to someone downstate who's got a domestic, from maybe 2002. And they say, look, I want to teach my son and daughter how to hunt. My dad, my grandpa taught me. I want to teach my kids. Is there a chance here? And usually if someone's calling me and telling me that there's a long ago history, we should be able to get, or you should be able to get that FOID card. The problems arise is if you didn't really leave those testosterone-fueled younger years behind, if in addition to those old convictions, you're continuing to get arrested, and for whatever reason, you had a bar fight 2 years ago and a DUI 4 years ago and an order of protection 6 years ago, I can't say to the judge with a straight face, hey, my client was a young, dumb punk. Because the judges love to hear that. They love to hear someone admit, you know what, I was young, dumb, and I was a punk. I was an idiot. And it's really hard to make that argument if you continue to get arrested. It doesn't have to be a conviction. Even if your prohibitor, that single prohibitor that lost your rights is 20 years ago, if you continue to get arrested and those things are being dismissed, the judges look at that. So that's really where you're going to run into trouble. And maybe from a civilization, do we want someone who's continuing to get in trouble and hasn't learned their lesson to get their rights restored right now? Maybe, maybe not. But at least that's the way the judges are looking at it lately.
You didn't quite say this, but I'm going to ask it. If somebody calls you and, say, doesn't have a chance at all, do you turn down clients or encourage them to say, oh, you got to straighten out your life, or maybe not? Maybe that's going too far. So do you turn down clients?
Yes. Generally, if it's the type of appeal that's going to go to the state police, I know it's going to be a legal review, and I know right off the bat whether we'll win. Because if the state police follows the law, we win. If it's going to the FOID card review board, generally I know whether we'll win or not. Depends on whether it's what's called a clear and present danger.
Right.
I don't know if we want to get into that, but it's kind of a separate issue. If it's something where we're going in front of a judge, the only odds I can give you when you call me are you have a great shot, aka 75% chance, just from what you're telling me, and maybe those odds go up or down the more I learn about it. Or you've got a 50-50, or you have no chance, meaning you have 3%. It's a super long shot. I tell folks all the time, I go, look, I can't risk my reputation to take money on something I intrinsically know is a 3, 4, 5% chance odds of winning. It's just not worth it. That's not sustainable. And I'll tell them, I go, look, here's what you need to do. Maybe you need to call me in a year. Maybe you need to go get an expungement for all these arrests that have been just hanging out. Maybe this or that. And I'll give them a little plan as to what to do if they want to follow up later on.
And I understand there's a lot of other costs too, if somebody has to do expungements and all that. In a straightforward case, what's the typical cost for someone to restore their firearm rights?
Well, there are a lot of different flavors. I mean, I would say if it's a basic, you've got a couple of felony thefts, maybe forgery or related type things, nothing violent, or standard possession of controlled substances where it's a class 3 or 4, it's going to be a few $1,000s. There's not going to be any filing fees. There's not any court costs. There's nothing else. If it's something we're going into court, well, first off, if it's in Cook County, the filing fee is just over $400. If we're in the collar counties, we're into the 300s, and that's usually where it is in central and southern Illinois as well. But that involves a hearing and witnesses and motions. And so that's going to be more than just a couple $1,000. That's going to be more. If you've got a mental health admission or a clear and present danger, you're going to have to get an evaluation. Now, I know most of the psychologists in the state that do these FOID evaluations, and I tell my clients I can refer you to folks, to see if you fit with them, but that's going to cost you a couple of grand. So it depends. It can either be something that folks will think, hey, that's really affordable, to, man, I really don't know if it's worth it. Let me think about it, if that makes sense.
Very good. I've heard, and mostly from conservative circles, that the FOID card is unconstitutional. We're going to sue, and there's some lawsuits out there. Do you think the FOID card will ever go away in Illinois?
I think there's going to be some type of license forever. Now, is it going to look like the FOID? I don't know. I can tell you that the concealed carry license statute, the FCCL statute, is very, very poorly written. We knew that was coming down, so we were ready. And January 1 of 2014, when it went active, we already had all of our challenges ready. And summer of 2014, I probably had 30 appeals just in Cook County that caused every single assistant attorney general to be pulled out of their cubicles and sent into court. There were lawyers that were being sent in that hadn't handled a litigation case because it caused the state police to have to write emergency rules to fix the issues. The FOID statute, there's problems with it, absolutely. They keep tinkering with it. It's better than it used to be. I still don't think it's where it should be. But I just don't think that anyone that says the FOID card act alone is unconstitutional, there should not be that kind of license. I don't think that's real. Excuse me, not real. I don't think that's realistic, especially in Illinois.
I agree with you. I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah.
So for a while, and keep in mind this information I'm about to share, is a little bit skewed. So you got to put on your be a skeptic hat. So I've had students who lived in unincorporated Cook County, and I've been told, although not from great sources, that Sheriff Tom Dart was objecting to all concealed carry applications across his desk. More likely, it's the administrative staff. He just gives them directions to do that. Is this still occurring, or did it ever occur? Let me ask you that first, and then is it still occurring if it did occur?
It's worse than that. My understanding, and it might have changed because I'm going back to 2014, my understanding is not only does Cook County Sheriff's Office, but CPD has someone that sits there, and everyone who applies, they will check their database. If there's anything in there that's domestic, anything in there violent, anything in there weapons related, it's an automatic objection. They don't review it to see if it's reasonable. They file it, and it goes to the Concealed Carry License Review Board. That is still happening. It used to be worse. The CPD would object for anything. They wouldn't even try to be reasonable about it. Now we've challenged them enough. I can give you one example. I had a former Marine who grew up on the west side, who came back after serving, bought a house in a blighted area, walked to go get dinner, came back. On his way back to his house, he was stopped by CPD, said, hey, they didn't even get out of the car. They said, where do you live? He had his bag of food, and he said, right over here, that brownstone right there. And they're like, okay, what's your name? They wrote it down. It's called a contact card.
Right. It
was a way for, you've heard of these. The objection to the review board was that his name appeared on a contact card. And we had to appeal and show that he was a Marine who went back, bought a house in the old neighborhood. He didn't do anything. He had his bag of food in his hand, and all he did, and we actually had to go to a hearing on that. Things are a little bit different. If you have any allegations of domestic violence, those are going to be on there. If you were never even arrested, they're going to be on there. If you've expunged them, they're going to be on there, because expungement tells the state police to destroy it. It doesn't tell the city of Chicago to destroy it. So there will be folks out there, you will see CCL instructors that say, hey, go expunge everything, you'll slide right through. Not correct. It might help, but in most cases, CPD won't destroy anything they have. And if they still see it in their database when that person who sits there 8 hours a day, you're going to get an objection.
Is there any liability to local law enforcement that does not have a justification or a legal justification to object? Like, can they be taken to court later on and say, look, you made me spend 10 grand to reinstate my rights when you guys should have not submitted an objection?
You can always take someone to court. However, the act says that Any objection simply has to have a reasonable basis. And as long as there is someone with a gun and a badge that will say, I think it was reasonable for us to object because this person is accused of slapping their girlfriend 15 years ago, your lawsuit is going to go nowhere.
I want my listeners to know that this is my dream, teaching people about safety. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my listeners, I couldn't live my dream. So on behalf of my family and myself, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to live my dream. And I also want to continue to live my dream, and I'm excited to continue to spread the word of safety. Recently, I began a new service as a conference keynote speaker. So if anyone would like for me to speak at future events, or if anyone knows of an introduction or would like to discuss how we can work with one another, I'd love to do just that. The keynote speaking website is www.stress2logic.com. That is STRES2logic.com. If you're aware of any conference speaking engagements where you'd like to have me speak, I'd love an introduction. You can always share my electronic business card, which is Marcus Melnick, MarcusMelnick.com. Now, back to the show. When we return, we'll be continuing the conversation with attorney Fred Nickl on restoration of Second Amendment rights in Illinois. Stay tuned. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.